Welcome back to Sociology 227. This is Pierre Bourdieu, video 2. In this video, I have 3 goals. In the first, I'm going to give you 3 examples to show you how to apply Pierre Bourdieu's sociology. Next, we'll briefly cover the content of the readings. Finally, I'll get you ready for your tutorials. Let's do it. As I told you in the last video, Bourdieu gives us a set of conceptual tools to explore how class and various types of capital come to impact the educational environment. Here I want you to think about the educational environment in a bunch of different ways. 1. In terms of the various cultural spaces where we display our levels of education. 2. The various ways that education reinforces particular bodily habits, the types of grammar, and the practices of imprinting it on young people. And 3. The types of behavior and symbolic practice that occurs in the school, university, or college itself. This is a broad understanding of education. In each sense, the university system, and especially the French university system, tends to reproduce social class. How? There is obviously the issue of cost. Those who have more education can afford it and pass it along. But Bourdieu will argue that this fails to understand the various other ways that people are siphoned away from higher education, about the class-based valuation of earned credentials, and the reinforced skills and the upbringing of the people entering the university system. To think about the higher education market strictly in terms of economic capital subsumes all of these other explanations to one variable. But we can't think of this field solely in terms of its structural conditions, Bourdieu argues. We have, as well, a series of learned dispositions that emerge. Not all of these are bad in the same way as structural conditions seem to suggest. We learn things like typing, writing, citation, grammar, basic skills we deem a social system like ours needs. But we also learn those skills that would allow an economic system like capitalism to continue. Marx would only focus on the latter. In the book on the slide, Bourdieu talks about this in terms of the politics of the French language. My friend Julien teaches French here at Queen's. Some of you might be in his classes. He has a 5-year-old son who loves making fun of my French accent, because I learned it on Duolingo. He'll say, "Bonjour Thomas, mon grand frère," with his head high and his chest puffed out, because he thinks I'm a cartoon character. I want you to think about the embodied mannerisms of language and how they're appropriate in particular fields and not in others. His son, obviously, thinks mine's a joke. Next, reflexivity. When Bourdieu speaks of reflexivity, he means a way of thinking and acting that takes itself as its object. In particular, his work on reflexive sociology is one that questions its own class biases and asks itself what gets considered knowledge in the academic setting. Bourdieu is taking aim at his contemporary French Marxists, who would explain away the desires and needs of the working classes based on their social position. To Marxists, ideology simply distorts oppression. But we aren't just handed our class position, like at a school cafeteria line. We live and embrace it. This he calls the theory effect. A question: if class is performed, why do we perform it? Sociologists don't just mark class out there. They reproduce their own class position, both in who they admit to the academic circle and how they regard members of other classes. Here I mean perform, not to mean a costume, but academics are distinguishing their own class interests in relation to others. Why do we explain away the ideology of the working class, but not that found in academic culture? In this sense, Bourdieu is as critical of the academic life as he is of the wine consumption I made fun of in the last video. My question to you, my prestigious Queen's students, is, after all this class posturing, is there any objective social science left? Okay, that's Bourdieu on education. A more fun example might be to think about the restaurant. Let's pick 2 across the street from each other, Jack Astor's and Tango Nuevo, both on King Street. Here we'll see distinction at work and return to questions of habitus, of disposition. Think about how you were greeted at the 2 different restaurants, and how the individual servers act and dress. When you walk into Jack Astor's, a lady your age, wearing all black and an earpiece, gives you a gigantic smile. "How are we doing today, you guys?" she says, as if interested in what 8 guys my age are doing. She asks if you were there to see the game. she clearly does not care, before sending you to someone's section. This is very different than the solemn greeting at the fancy restaurant, where they ask you immediately if you have a reservation. The lights are low, and there is a book at the front with everyone's name very solemnly written down. The host is generally free to wear whatever they want, and the smile and eye contact is much more reserved. There is a mood to both places. Both casual, yes, but distinct. And if you go to any Jack Astor's and any tapas place in North America, you're going to get the same mood. This is Bourdieu's field. Note how I said tapas and not tapas. The menu is important too. We also have very different types of cuisine, both in style and presentation. At Jack Astor's, you know you can get the same pile of nachos at any location in the damn world. The portions are generous. You want a burger? There's 18 of them. Drink specials too. Any night of the week, you can get a different sugary drink served in a punch bowl at a discount. Or $6 beers all summer long. You get a very different experience at your fancy tablecloth spot. There is a wine list, a small menu, usually rotating, featuring the chef's selection of the most delicious local ingredients. The plates, as you can expect, are small. Small may be shareable. There is a list for wine available by the glass or the bottle. You get to have descriptions of each of them, even ask for a taste if you want. There might be a drink feature, but no special. And don't order a Long Island iced tea. Not just drinks and dishes. Think about the ingredients. You can always ask where your duck confit was sourced. Not so with the nacho platter. Finally, the question of gender. Some people use this to critique Bourdieu. Let's take a look. The division of labor is gendered in these and almost all other restaurants. Think about the kinds of roles distributed to those of a particular gender and who is present to public view and who is not. While most restaurants don't have explicit rules about who is in and who is out of view, or in a particular job, the reality is very different. So too are forms of dress, habitual forms of action, and the capital available to those who operate in the field. Many have asked if Bourdieu can sufficiently account for gendered norms. What is gender? Just a resource? A class? Just a bodily attribute? Subjective? Objective? Both? The importance of these questions will become evident later in the course when we talk about Judith Butler. In sum, Bourdieu's position is that the restaurant industry is a site of symbolic struggle. Fine dining isn't simply fine because it is better than other forms of dining. It represents a symbolic economy, just like going to Jack Astor's. Position and disposition are both at work. Let me show you a different example, in coffee. This is my buddy Alexis's shop in Toronto, Wallace Espresso. He just opened a new location. I had to get him to text me this photo today. I think that when we look to the way that people consume coffee, we see habitus at work, in the way that workplace norms become embodied and social hierarchy is organized. Taste for particular brands of coffee represents one's place in the social hierarchy, and how we mobilize different types of capital in our coffee preferences. Consider the different attitudes, dispositions, and symbolic mechanisms at work in Tim Hortons versus Starbucks versus Wallace Espresso. Think about the clientele, the discussions you can have about your coffee, I'd like a double-double versus let's talk about mouthfeel, and the design of the restaurant. In this case, just like that of your two very different dining experiences, we see Bourdieu's capital, position, and disposition at work. This is a very different understanding of capital than the one we read in Marx. For Bourdieu, cultural consumption is a place where we mobilize capital to navigate hierarchy. For Marx, capital expresses material life, whereby we have labor alienated and become what we are based on our proximity to the means of production. Both are talking about the same place, the coffee shop, but from two very different angles. Finally, let's talk about that Jenkins piece you read about clothing norms in the hospital. Jenkins shows how Bourdieu can help us explore position and disposition in the healthcare setting. I like the piece because it gives us a plain language understanding of Bourdieu's terminology, capital, field, and habitus. She also brings it to the hospital. Despite the differences in the Canadian and American systems, I think it is very easy to see how applicable the analysis is. In Canada, just as the US, there is a significant income difference in the hospital's division of labor. but we find similar clothing norms in both spots. Bourdieu often talks about symbolic violence and how classist norms exclude people from settings like higher education. In using symbolic efficiency, Jenkins illustrates that these cultural norms of dress aren't really a ruse. It's not just an ideological veil on the division of labor, as Marx would have it. Nor are they just the site of violence. As a field, the hospital mobilizes the forms of capital found in dress, and these norms are deployed by all members in the field in order to keep the institution running. They serve as a quick reference guide that members use to identify the social roles of hospital members, even ones who they haven't met. In the case of admissions to the ER, Jenkins is clear. We read on page 536. In an emergency, the symbolic efficiency of marking authority can be a matter of life and death. The point is that in this field, clothing habits are a site of distinction. I mentioned to you in the past video that in Bourdieu's major work, Distinction, he argues taste is a social product. And this is precisely what Jenkins does in terms of clothing in the hospital. Nobody is forced to stylize their scrubs or Crocs, and yet they do, and do so in ways that are identifiable with their wealth, their class, their level of education, etc. The hospital setting is the field. These inputs are the forms of capital. And the styles of dress reflect the habitus, the series of dispositions deployed in that setting. When you think of Bourdieu, keep the hospital in mind. You guys have your first substantive tutorial this week, on Tuesday or Thursday, depending on group. What are you going to do? First, you're going to do a brief review of the material, and then you're going to have your first workshop on effective thesis statements. Et avec ça, mes élèves, à bientôt.